Yeah, so many international pressure today, so many people talking on this issue, but this conference result we have seen Xi Jinping intention never change, continue crackdown, continue and genocidal policy implemented. This is a very horrible situation. So that's why we need the whole world, particularly democratic society, democratic nation, should be stand with us, should be saying stop to Chinese persecution towards the Uyghur is 21st century. Because after Second World War, all the world leader had a bad experience. More than 6 million Jewish people were killed, Nazi regime, and the same never again. But never again is happening again today in Turkestan. But still, as I said, so many countries continue silent, and so many, unfortunately, so many Muslim countries not only silent, even support Chinese government policy against the Uyghurs. And I would like to say and also use this opportunity. India is one of the largest economy around the world and one of the largest democracy around the world. Very powerful country, but from this case, we have never seen the India government also most of the time silent. The United Nations Human Rights Council June sections, 28 countries made jointly statement and asked the Chinese government stop, close down this concentration camp. Is of course, and the opposite, 46 countries support Chinese policy openly and signed a joint statement. One side, 28 countries against the Chinese policy towards Uyghur. Other side, 46 countries support Chinese policy. And Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, this is all the Muslim nations support the Chinese policy against Uyghur. You know? So we know India is a host for the Tibetan brother since 1959. 100,000 Tibetan refugees are safe, staying safely in India. India government hosts for this. And even India also hosts the Uyghur refugees in 1949, first country. After Chinese occupation, our leader Muhammad ibn Bura, Isa Yusuf al-Tikin escaped. 100,000 Uyghurs escaped from East Turkestan because of after communist China occupied, and they came to the India, Kashmir, until 1952. So we are very grateful Indian. We have a very historical link between India and the Uyghurs people. Actually, India has no border with China. India has a border with Turkestan, Tibet. When before this Turkestan has been occupied, and India, Turkestan, Uyghur people had no problem. We are very peaceful neighbors. You know? Now it is the problem. The Chinese government not only threats the Uyghurs, it is threat is the national sovereignty is India. Not only India, all neighboring countries. That's why it is very important, and India supports the Uyghurs, not only because of benefit, also for long security, safety for the India people in the India sovereignty. That's why I believe, and of course, in so many civil society in India media are really recently supporting and with us. But I hope same reaction should be coming by the government to the international forum, access United Nations Human Rights Council, some other occasion. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dalkan. That was a wonderful statement of yours. I hope the India policymakers are listening to that, on your appeal on the peaceful Turkestan border, right? In the meanwhile, I would like to state that while you have the route to Turkey, you didn't mention about the Turkish government stance on this thing, no? While Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, and I think this Turkish government led by Erdogan, who is jumping into all support every Muslim issues around the globe, has been a little bit silent or a bit proactive towards China. Do you feel that?
Well, Turkish government didn't support the Chinese government's statement. Turkish government is silent. Of course, because Turkish government should be broken. There's all wish. Turkish government should be spoke loudly and ask Chinese government should stop this persecution to the Uyghurs. But why I'm mentioning the Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, because they are openly support the Chinese policy. This is the countries 40 among them 46. This is. India didn't sign, not support the 28 country, no support 46. Turkish also say this is the. That's why we are trying to welcome Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkish government, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, this all the Muslim country also didn't support us or didn't support China. Just natural. But I can tell no such atrocities are going on. This is a no natural position. Natural position is meaning support Chinese policy. Yeah. And the other issue, 2019, February, 43 section of the Human Rights Council, Turkish Foreign Ministry Çavuşoğlu raises issue to the United Nations. They are ready and asks the Chinese government, at least he made a statement and condemns China. Yeah. His position, Turkish position, completely different. Pakistan, Egypt, and these countries. That's why I don't talk about Turkey. And besides this, Turkey, one thing I have to mention, 2014, 2013, huge Uyghur refugee crisis has happened. More than 10,000 Uyghurs escaped from China, from East Turkestan to Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. So 109 Uyghur refugees forcibly deported from Thailand to China. No news, almost 5 years, no news. We don't know what was happening for them. That time, Turkey, all is a country, we are hosting Uyghur refugees. This is also refugee. Of course, this is not good enough, but we have a long historical tie to Tibetan or Turkey, like India government supporting Tibet issue. In the history, Turkey supporting Uyghur refugees. It is the situation. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Dolken. I now welcome Rushan. I think Rushan can throw light on. I would like to mention about, you can speak about your sister also, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, who was a medical doctor and who is now into forced labor. And I would also like you to mention about Madan Gapar, that model whose video has appeared on August first week this year, about his being confined in a concentration camp, shackled in this he is mentioning 4 cells, he was in cells. So I welcome Rushan to talk about campaign for Uyghurs in the United States and about the issue at large.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak at this panel with a company of such a distinguished people here. My old friend, Dolkun Isa, spoke very eloquently and detailedly about the gravity of the current situation in East Turkestan that Uyghurs are facing. Everything he said is, like, that's what's happening at the front of the entire world, and the Chinese government is basically committing crimes against humanity and getting away with it. Everything you have heard from Dolkun, it's, this is something unreal. Something like this never ever happened in any part of the world in the recent history. So I'm here today to speak to you, not just an Uyghur American, but as a citizen of the world. The genocide that what's happening to Uyghurs will be repeated and they replicated if the responsible, freedom-loving societies of the world do not act to stop it. And my connection with these brutalities and the drive that I have to address the Chinese regime's crimes against humanity is fueled by a very personal desire and the desire to see my own sister again. As it was mentioned here, my sister is abducted 2 years ago. So we founded the organization Campaign for Uyghurs in late 2017, as we saw an increasing need to advocate for the Uyghurs' human rights and the democratic freedoms, raise awareness about this unprecedented atrocity of this century, which Uyghurs were currently facing after we started to hear that over 1 million Uyghurs were abducted from spring of 2017, and the world community was absolutely muted. It was not even being covered in the media, and the Chinese government was completely denying it. So that's why we established this organization to raise awareness, and especially for the need which we saw to empower Uyghur women and prepare them, activate them for this activism and help amplify their voice in our cause. So in September 2018, I spoke on the Hudson Institute, one of the think tanks here in Washington. There was a panel about the concentration camps where the disappearing into which, the current situation is moderated by Eric Brown, someone most of my co-panelists know well of, Eric from the Hudson Institute. Just 6 days later, just 6 days after I spoke there, talking about the conditions of the camps, outlining the fate of my in-laws, my sister and my aunt were abducted from two separate cities, about 1,400 kilometers away from each other. They both gone without a word to those camps, disappeared. And they, just abducted by the Chinese government, just like that. My aunt later released, after I was being very vocal about this in the media and talking about this everywhere in social media, but there's absolutely no information about my sister's whereabouts. I have watched her two daughters here, both live here in America as US citizens, have struggled to live their normal lives and to parent their own children. They are living in the emotional agony. For what? When you look at it, it's all because Chinese government's determination to exterminate Uyghurs' ethnic identity and now their very lives. What we used to refer to as a cultural genocide isn't just a fact, it's just a genocide. It is a pure and a simple active genocide. No need to dilute or weaken the word. There are reports that crematoria is being built next to the concentration camps for a culture that doesn't practice cremation. If you recall, in the history, when there's a concentration camps and the crematorias, we all know what happened. An outright Holocaust taken place. And my sister, she's a retired medical doctor, and she has no need for so-called vocational training, as the Chinese authorities refer to their barbaric genocidal policies currently. My sister is a law-abiding citizen of China who is not vocal or active, but just living her altruistic, simple life. My sister speaks fluent Chinese. So why is she taken? If not for a retaliation for my activism, they're using the democratic platforms to share the truth about what's happening to the Uyghurs. And my story is not an isolated one, although it's unique in that it demonstrates the Uyghurs are not being taken because they are extremists or they need a job to survive or job trainings, as Chinese government continues to conveniently claim and lie. They are being taken so that the regime can wage its war on religion while it has a free game to take advantage of the rich natural resources in East Turkestan, all in pursuit of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is paving the way to the world domination. So when you look at, the name Xinjiang that given to us by the Chinese regime that China calls our homeland East Turkestan, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which means new territory. But as Indians will also know, the historic pathways of the Uyghur people are also closely linked with India, as my friend Dolphin mentioned. And now we are colonized. Perhaps my Indian friends will know the string that colonization brings, and slowly and surely ethnic identity is erased, culture and the language disappear. And then perhaps something more sinister, the very disappearance of an entire ethnic group facing eradication. Our people were lured by the Chinese Communist Party with promises of developing the land, developing our homeland, and giving us autonomy, but all of our rights have disappeared. We have seen the deliberate stoking of ultra-nationalist and the racist sentiments of the Chinese regime increase substantially under Xi Jinping, who's basically exploiting the control of information and the brainwashing of the population to create acceptance for barbaric policies of the CCP. The normalization of slavery, as Dolphin mentioned earlier, the imprisoning the entire group of the people based on ethnic identity is not new to the international community, but the unique ways that the Chinese regime is getting away with repeating history's atrocities is horrifying for us. The pain that I'm facing on the personal level and the constant horror of hearing the stories of the Uyghurs across the world drives me in increase my efforts and keep going no matter what the obstacles that we face. When I think about my sister, think about what she's facing in detention, gives me the strength to fight harder. The love I have for my sister and for my people is where I recharge myself with energy and the double and the triple my efforts. There is so much that needs to be done to educate the world on what's happening and the realities of the Chinese Communist Party and the China's malicious system. Much of our work centers around raising this awareness. We work with the faith groups, grassroots organizations, and the government leaders and advisors around the world to try to increase the alliance of those upstanders who will recognize the existence of a true evil in the world today. The worst part of this atrocity is how so many people, especially in Muslim majority countries, remain in the dark about the ways that the CCP is attempting to completely eliminate their Uyghur Muslim brothers and sisters. We must amplify the voices of the Uyghurs to speak the truth, especially those women and the youth who suffer particularly brutally under the Chinese regime. We must continue to seek to provide environments of safety for Uyghurs in diaspora, where they are given tools and the platforms to speak. And we must link arms and come alongside them to stand together against this monstrous evil. The authoritarian monster that China has become is a daunting opponent, but we believe that God is on the side of justice. China is an imminent and present danger to the world democracy and freedom. As such, we should also call out how China's crimes are being affirmed and rewarded by the international community. The whole world is pragmatically weighing the question of how we can afford to address China. But the truth is, we cannot afford to allow this regime to go unchecked any longer. We are basically dealing with the modern day equivalent of Nazi Germany. But today, China is even being rewarded with hosting the 2022 Beijing Olympics, the Beijing Winter Olympics, while they continue to leverage control over the UN, the very organization that was instituted to prevent situations like this from occurring. We are repeating the history mistakes very literally as the vow never again comes to nothing. China's blood money has purchased the compliance of the UN, of the World Health Organization, of Islamic countries, of corporations, of the NBA, the IOC, of OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Hollywood, celebrities, and the world must take the note. History will remember the upstanders and condemn those who fail to stand for what's right in the face of this evil. In India, you all know very well that the threat that China poses, it's seeking the world domination. And to what end? We need only look at what's happening to the Uyghurs to know to what end. No free speech, no religion, no freedom or thought or ideas, or even no ethnic identity and the culture will be tolerated by this communist regime, by CCP. Only loyalty to themselves and their imperialist greed that denies the value of human lives. Just to look at how they have acted to agonize and to threaten India right now. Look at the Uyghur people right now, what's happening to Tibetans. Look at Hong Kong. Look at the threat they are posing against Taiwan. Perhaps it's hard to fully grasp on how something so weak and malevolent can be so real, can be even real. I want to remind everyone listening, you do not have to be Muslim, or you do not have to be Uyghur. You do not even have to be an activist to be an upstander. We need every single voice uniting together to say that we will defend the conscience of humanity from heaven, never again repeat itself again. At present, it's an uphill battle that we must bring allies alongside us for. This is not an American issue. This is not an Indian issue, not a political issue, but it is a test for the soul and the conscience of the humanity. It's not just about the Uyghurs' future anymore is at stake here, but the future of the free world is in danger. Please act not just to save the Uyghurs, but to save your own future, the future of the world that you are leaving behind for your children and for your grandchildren. For that, you must take action now. I want to end my remarks by giving some very practical steps about how you can join with our organizations in ending these atrocities. Please educate those around you, not just about the current political situation in East Turkestan, but about what the CCP is doing to Uyghurs and how it built up to this genocide, how it started like decades ago, and where we are now, because genocide or colonizations, it doesn't start in overnight. It's a step by step, like what they are doing to the world right now, to Pakistan, to India, to African countries, in the Middle East. Basically, those are the steps that the Chinese government did in East Turkestan in the history. So learn the history. Don't become victims of the China's colonization and the global domination. And encourage India to continue to use its influence in the United Nations to demand accountability, counter Chinese influence, and create a UN convoy to investigate what is happening in East Turkestan and to the Uyghur people. And the Indian cities with sister city relationships with Chinese cities should be pressured to drop. Can you imagine? There's like 20, 30 cities in India right now, sister cities with China. For what? Spreading China's communist ideologies? These sister cities are avenues for China to push its communistic ideologies and the influences and to push its Belt and Road Initiative, which is the geopolitical reason for this genocide of the Uyghurs currently. So you should pressure your politicians to drop off all these sister cities like Prague did bravely. Prague just ended sister city relationship with one of the Chinese cities. And also join in pushing the IOC to move the Olympics. And should they refuse, then we must all pressure our governments to decline to participate. Do not buy Chinese goods and encourage Indian companies to divest from China. In the US, we are urging American companies to pursue other partnerships outside of China as well. So together, our efforts to protect the soul of humanity and to stop the genocide of the Uyghurs and save the future of this free world that we all love and we all worked so hard to must go forward. Thank you.
Rushan, thank you very much for that informative talk and what Campaign for Uyghurs is doing in the United States of America. And we could resonate with what you spoke about, the humanity, world freedom, and about the Winter Olympics and how China is pushing a blood economy to bring up the Winter Olympics in Beijing. And it's a very well informative talk you have made on the subject. And we are very sorry to listen to about your sister being abducted for no wrong of hers, and as a retaliation to what you spoke in a think tank meet. So thank you very much, respected Jadhav sir, Chinese expert. Jadhav sir, I wholeheartedly welcome you for the webinar right now to air your views.
Thank you, Mr. Lakshman. We just heard firsthand from the two people who are deeply involved in the, shall I say, East Turkestan and the Uyghur issues. So I will try and confine myself primarily to how we see the issues from the perspective of what Beijing is doing and how they're going about it. But before I start, let me just make a couple of points. Firstly, I think Dolkunisa did mention about the links, and so did Ms. Rushan Abbas, about the links that existed between India and East Turkestan long time ago, but even more recently, when Isa Altakin, who was the General Secretary of East Turkestan, I think the first one, when he had to leave, they came to India, to Kashmir, as he rightfully pointed out. And Erkin, his son, was here. He studied here. I had the pleasure of meeting him a few times. a man who thought big, who thought about once again Turkestan becoming free, and he worked on it. So you're carrying on a tradition. I also happen to know some people who took up the cause later. If you know them and if you meet them, do convey my regards. Nuri Turkel is one, and Asim Semitov is another. So they're still active, I know. And all I will say is that attempts in history to stamp out the slightest trace of a people have not really succeeded. I think in history we have seen various attempts at trying to control people's minds, at trying to make them change their religion. To an extent, those might have succeeded. But to wipe out an entire people and to remove the trace has not succeeded. And I don't think it will succeed even now. Both of you have mentioned how Uyghurs have escaped. They have gone to various countries in Southeast Asia and to Turkey. I know that there has been a lot of cooperation between certain branches of the Turkish government and the Uyghurs. So whatever the Chinese may do, those Uyghurs will remain. And I'm sure other things will happen. But to get back to China, I'm not going to go too far back, but let's say after the riots in 2009, I think that was a kind of a change in the Chinese perspective and how they looked at the Uyghurs particularly. And two things were at play at that time, in my view. One was China's propaganda apparatus, which is one of the very powerful organizations within the Chinese Communist Party, that began putting out a narrative to drive a wedge, create a difference between the Hans and the Uyghurs. And so one came across a number of reports about how the Hans felt terrorized in Urumqi and other places, how the Uyghurs went wild and slaughtered the Hans. Some truth, some untruth, but that was the narrative that was spun by the propaganda department. And what happened was that it sowed the seeds of differences between the two and a kind of a hatred or antagonism among the Hans. The same thing happened, incidentally, a year earlier in Tibet. So they have been pushing this narrative. Since then, there have been a number of reports in the Chinese media, which I'm sure you follow very closely, but number of reports of how when Uyghurs traveled into other parts of China, when they traveled to the bigger cities, particularly during major functions or major events, how they were told, do not enter the city, or in many cases, they were questioned, their identities were checked and confirmed. And for example, in places like Beijing and Shanghai, only a few hotels were earmarked and they were told to go and stay in those hotels so that they could be kept in one solitary place. So there were a number of such cases. Obviously, resentment was fueled, and we saw an attack on the Tiananmen, the gates of Tiananmen, in fact, in 2013, when an SUV, a loaded SUV, went and hit them. After that, there was a knife attack just a few months later in Kunming. But what the Chinese authorities did was they used these events to not only brand, but to underline or highlight the so-called terrorist activities of Uyghurs. They used 9/11 at one time to brand the ETIM as a terrorist organization. And there it was a kind of a arrangement. The Americans agreed because they needed Chinese assistance in the global war against terror. So that is how that happened. But it was there. But after the 2013 attacks, Xi Jinping addressed a Politburo meeting in December that year, where in fact he stressed that social stability and enduring peace should be the prime test from now onwards in Xinjiang. In other words, he gave a carte blanche to the security forces to use all means available to see that social stability, as the Chinese call it, was maintained. And terrorism was the excuse. It is using this that they brought in new techniques like re-education of the people, which is, in other words, like a brainwashing that is done of the people. Subsequently, Xi Jinping took over as chairman of the Central Small Leading Group in charge of United Front. That is the body, so again, a very important body in the Chinese Communist Party, which looks after non-Chinese and Communist Party entities, which looks after religious affairs, which looks after ethnic minorities. He took over as the chairman of this, doubled its staff, doubled its budget, and began taking a personal interest in the policies of the United Front. He has a long family connection with United Front. He himself was party secretary of the Fujian province when the first World Buddhist Conference was held, if you remember. And he helped in making the arrangements. Before that, his father, Shi Chongshun, was the interlocutor on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party with the Dalai Lama's envoys, which is, again, it was a United Front activity. So he has a connection, and therefore he has a familiarity. Subsequently, there were extremification measures that the Chinese Communist Party introduced from March 2017. And these were, to my mind, the beginning of a sustained and coordinated program to really remove all traces of the Uyghur people. Because what it mandated was, of course, they prohibited the wearing of certain clothes, of using face coverings, of having certain kinds of beards. Even name selections were controlled, because they said, I think it was 49 names, were, if you named your child any one of those 49 names, they said he would become an extremist. How they came to that conclusion remains a mystery, but they did. Certain marriage procedures were also stopped. They did not allow them. In 2018, a year later, the United Front Work Department brought out, and the State Administration for Religious Affairs, they promulgated a detailed 5-year plan for Sinicizing Protestants, Catholics, and Muslims. You can imagine what the plan was. Sinicizing, in other words, I would say a better word may be Hanizing of these people. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, in his government work report to the National People's Congress, which is the Chinese version of a parliament, at the plenary session in March 2019, he carried forward this same formula, and he said, and I will quote him, "We must fully implement the party's fundamental policy on religious affairs and uphold the Sinicization of religion in China," unquote. In other words, it had become not only party policy, but by presenting it to the National People's Congress and getting their approval, it had now become a state policy. So the government and the party formally were backing the same arrangement. Dolkun did refer to Chen Guangguo's regime. In fact, Chen Guangguo continues to be the party secretary in Xinjiang. He left quite an indelible imprint when he was in Tibet. He set up what are called convenience stations, convenience police stations. And a convenience police station is one where all facilities are available. In other words, they know everything about everyone in that neighborhood. And he also created what is called an iron grid, which is that within 3 minutes of an incident occurring, the police would reach that spot within 3 minutes. He set up a Skynet program whereby all electronic communications were monitored. The only advantage of that to the Tibetan people there was a sudden surge in employment, because he needed people who could monitor who could be the monitors, who could do the monitoring of the electronic communications. So I think there were about 10,000 people who were employed at that point in time. He has moved to Xinjiang, he has carried out the same things. And he has implemented a policy called the house guest policy or the pairing of policies, which is one party member being lodged in the house of a Uyghur. He brings, I believe, he brings his own rations and he stays there. But most of the houses are one room or 1.5 room. In other words, he knows everything that is happening there and he's an unwelcome guest, but he's a guest. He's right there. So he has brought party surveillance to a new level inside Xinjiang. In Xinjiang, around that time, the internment camps were set up and about 1 million Muslims were moved into these internment camps. A lot of stories, a lot of reports exist, in fact, not stories. A lot of reports about how they were picked up and moved to the camps, regardless of age and regardless of their state of health, where they were forced to denounce Islam and pledge loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Expressions of Islam, food habits, etc., were all curbed. During Ramzan, in fact, particular care was taken to see that there was no fasting. The community kitchens were kept open and an attendance was taken to see that the Muslims did have their breakfast, did have their lunch, though they were not supposed to. So things like that were introduced and brought into Xinjiang. There was also the Xinjiang Production Construction Corps, which was set up a long time ago, but it still continues. There had been, shall I say, one of the conditions was that they could intermarry and thereby try and bring about a change in the demographic balance. They are still there. They have been reinvigorated at the last party congress. They've been given more funding. They've been asked to take over more farms and continue their functions. So there is a two-pronged effort on this front. Meanwhile, I would say that because of the re-education camps, or as Dolkun called it, internment camps, the problems of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang has, or in China, I would say, has got international attention. Some journalists were expelled. I remember meeting at that same conference, Dolkun, where you were supposed to come in Dharamsala, Ursula Gauthier. She had been expelled. She gave us a detailed account, I mean, in private, when we went off for coffee later, as to how it happened and what was going on. So, but international attention today, I would say, is focused on the fate of the Uyghurs, on what is happening to them. And one would have expected that there would be certain changes in China's policy. The only change, I think, was that they closed down some re-education centers and they have opened some new ones. In fact, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which was referred to earlier, they have come out with a very detailed report which talks about 380 new camps which have been opened, and they have established that through satellite imagery about the new camps which have come out. Funnily enough, some of their people even went to the old camps and found nothing there. They found the physical structure, but nothing else. So obviously there has been some effort at relocation of a lot of people. But while all this is going on, China remains as confident and conscious of itself, because on the 17th of September, they came out with a white paper called White Paper on Employment and Labor Rights in Xinjiang. Apart from everything else that it spelled out, it said that the state must educate and rescue those infected with religious extremism. This is the language that is there in that white paper. And it talks about the local people, which would mean, of course, the Uyghurs, having outdated ideas and poor education. So this was the white paper that has just been brought out, despite world attention being focused on China and the Uyghur issue. No doubt, to an extent, they have been encouraged by the fact that the Muslim nations have by and large kept quiet on what is going on there, the atrocities going on there. And the answer is very simple. many of them have benefited from the funding that is coming in to them. But an example here is that of Kazakhstan. It is a place where the people are getting a lot of funding, but they're quite unhappy with the Chinese presence because the Chinese are everywhere. Their currency is now the operational currency in Kazakhstan. And the Chinese of late have made a demand for a portion of Kazakhstan, which is the Pamir, to be given to them. So there is a problem already occurring there. And as I think Ms. Rushan Abbas said, that this is a problem which is going to spread as China keeps asking for more and more everywhere else. The ASPI Institute has also spoken about the systematic destruction of the mosques. And it has said that over 16,000 mosques have been destroyed in Xinjiang since 2017. And 1.2 million people have been processed through the re-education camps from 2014 to 2019 each year. So there has been a systematic, as I said, I don't call it a genocide. I don't call it a change of the demographic balance, but I call it an effort to stamp out any traces of a people and a civilization. The same thing is being done with Tibet. The same thing is being done with the Uyghurs. The other aspect, which I think does need mention, is that of language. The effort is to replace their languages with Mandarin and then slowly see that that language itself dies away. With Xinjiang, they did try it in certain places. I think they're still trying it. In Tibet, they have started it, but not inside the Tibet Autonomous Region. They're doing it in the Tibetan areas surrounding the Tibet Autonomous Region. In Inner Mongolia, they have brought it in, and there are problems in Inner Mongolia. There have been protests, a series of protests, and people have decided that they're not going to send their children to school. So there are a lot of problems going on there. The other aspect is the effort by the Chinese and the People's Liberation Army to look at the ethnic minorities of Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Tibet as, I would say, almost cannon fodder, as people who can be recruited into the People's Liberation Army and sent to the front to fight. In Mongolia, they were looking at it. That has added to the resentment in Mongolia. And in fact, some Mongolians were quoted saying there are so many more Hans than Mongols. Why are you picking us up to be sent to Tibet? So there are various factors here which these people are trying to look at. Finally, let me just say that the restiveness that we are seeing, increased restiveness that we are seeing in Tibet, in Xinjiang among the Uyghurs, and in Mongolia, actually means that the outer periphery of China is now disturbed. There are two things happening, which my Uyghur friends would know far better. But one is the sustained United States pressure on the People's Republic of China, a pressure that I think has weakened China's economy more than COVID, or it has accelerated the weakening that COVID has done. And it has set back China's technology development programs. If this pressure continues, I think China will find the going more difficult. The second thing is the pressure that the Americans have brought onto the Chinese Communist Party and its cadres. For example, they said that those cadres who are responsible for the formulation or implementation of repressive policies on the local people will face US sanctions. And Chen Quango was one person, one cadre who was named the provincial secretary of Xinjiang Autonomous Region. He's the only one who responded also by saying, I'm not bothered about sanctions. But no one else did, because many of them either have money stored abroad or they have their children studying abroad, and they're all vulnerable. We saw what has happened in the case of Hong Kong. The chief executive, Carrie Lam, her son had to cut short his doctoral studies and come back. So this pressure, if it continues, it could exacerbate the problems that China is facing including on its periphery. So all I will say is that China does have a problem on its hands, and China recognizes that. Finally, let me conclude by saying that the suspicions that the Chinese have of the Russians, and of course the Russians have of the Chinese, haven't also died away. There was an article which was written, I think it was in 2003, if my memory is correct, called The Six Wars That China Must Fight in the Next 50 Years. It was published in the Wan Wai Pao, which is a Chinese-owned newspaper out of Hong Kong. The last war is with Russia over Xinjiang. So I'll stop there, and I hope that I meet my friends again. And I think I must compliment Mr. Arun Lakshman for taking this initiative and bringing us all together and discussing a very important subject. Thank you.
Thank you, James. That is a wonderful insights on what is happening in communist China. As a state where it is ruled by the Communist Party, and the Communist Party time and again coming out, you would have seen in the newspaper, the news reports of Kerala Chief Minister time and again coming out that the Holy Quran, we are for the Holy Quran, we are for the Muslims, and it's for the vote bank. They're trying for the vote bank politics. But unfortunately, you have brought out a clear picture on 2017 to 2020. The Chinese Communist Party was instrumental in demolishing mosques. 15,000 mosques were demolished. And the point you raised was very interesting. The final war between Russia and China for Xinjiang province. And secondly, the American pressure is it's a very valid point. Even the communists of our home state, we know they are traveling regularly to the United States for medication, for the children's education, everything they want from the capitalist West, and especially the US, whom they criticize time and again. So they'll be vulnerable. The communist leaders will be vulnerable if the US put pressure that the Chinese are not welcome or they'll face sanctions in the United States. That's a very valid point. I think Dolken can come out to share one or two good points on what Fernandez has told from his experience on what's happening in China. Dolken, please.
Dolken, you need to unmute.
Yeah, you have to unmute.
Dolken, you need to unmute.
Sorry, yeah. Some noisy coming from place. I couldn't hear your voice very well for some reason.
Yeah, your voice I'm hearing. I'm hearing your voice. We are hearing your voice. I think I'm hearing.
No, he said he couldn't hear you because there is some other voice that is coming in. It's interrupting us.
Okay. Now it's okay?
Now you need to unmute this person, Kayam Kulam. The voice is coming from that mic.
Oh, okay. It's muted now.
Maybe China hack us.
Dolken, you can hear me? You can hear me?
Yeah, now is a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, I think there is some audio problem.
Now this person, Kayam Kulam Yunus,
Yes.
mute this person.
Maybe. Muted now. Yeah. Now it's okay.
Repeat your question, Mr. Lakshman. I think.
I'll repeat the question. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Dolken, actually, Ranade sir has spoken about how vulnerable the Chinese are if the US is bringing out sanctions on the children not being able to travel to US for further higher education, and how these people want to be send their votes in the US, and also the US government putting pressure on China on the economic front, on the business perspective. This point he has mentioned very clearly. And also about 16,000 mosques being destroyed, that you may be knowing on history. But this, and also the final war will be fought between Russia and China for the Xinjiang province. That also I want a quick bit of talk from you on these points raised by Rana Desa.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And U.S. government recently really starts concrete action. Now is already approved Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act into the law after President Trump signed October this year, or no, last year. And now just last week, another bill approved by the U.S. Congress is Uyghur forced labor bill approved by the U.S. Congress. Now we are waiting to vote in the Senate. It is very significant for us. And after first bill signed by the President Trump, then U.S. authority really starts sanction some high-level Chinese official Communist Party member in East Turkestan, in the Xinjiang, Xinjiang, Zhuhailang, some others, and some Chinese company. As I know, already 50 Chinese company has been sanctioned by the U.S. government. It is very important issue. Now, still so many U.S. company and so many European company has been continue business with China. Now, is most of them this European company, Western company, have a link with the forced labor issue, slavery workers issue. So that's why we all to Congress, some other organization set up a coalition with the international coalition. We launched some stop forced labor issue. 188 organizations, including 70 Uyghur organizations around the world, and the rest of more than 120 in human rights organization, labor organization. We start and the coalition and stop the business with China. Now is this coalition growing up more than 230 organizations now we are working on. U.S. Congress sanctioned to the Chinese government and the Chinese officials and the company, and also European Parliament passed the resolution 2018 October 1 urgent resolution on concentration camp mostly. 2019 December another resolution. Recently EU and the Chinese summit was held by the video conference by Merkel and Ursula von der Leyen. This all conversation and all this meeting, Uyghur issue, forced labor issue, and the concentration camp issue, one of the main important part of this conversation. This and it brings some positive step at the moment. I already told my statement. Chinese government at the beginning denied everything, but no, it couldn't hide this reality, but continue implement this genocide policy towards Uyghur. No, it is the important point. Business company should be stop the business. It is not right time business as usual. Because of international coalition, because of international pressure, now some company really stop business with China. This is the very positive step. For example, Norwegian petrol fund stops the business with China. 14th of September, they declare this. And another Swedish company, H&M, they stop the business with China. Because this all and the Adidas now, and also promise to remove the business with China. Because this cotton industry around the world, 22% cotton from East Turkestan. This is the common forced labor. 85% cotton productions in China coming from East Turkestan, from the Uyghur forced labor. So that's why now Of course, US government really focusing, really trying to stop this atrocity. But not only US government doing something, not it is important, significant, but not only US, only one country doing this, not very effective. That's why should all the country, particularly democratic nation, democratic country, must be set up coalition. Then it will be useful. But there's no Chinese government is trying to undermine European Union sometimes. We have seen very well, undermine European Union. And also today China's second big donor for the United Nations. So Chinese government not trying to monopolize the UN human rights system, Human Rights Council, and the Health Organization, and so many people died because of the Chinese government not really fighting for the COVID-19. Chinese government fighting against the truth, hiding the reality, not sharing the information on time. If Chinese government shares the information on time, rest of the world not blocks the information, maybe less people die. No, it's so many people died and around the world because of Chinese dictatorial regimes, because of the Chinese government and the blocks the information, not sharing the cooperation with internationally. This is the big. This is the result. So many people dying today, and the Chinese government use its power, monopolize Interpol, use Interpol against, misuse Interpol against in the oppositions. Yeah, that's why my name is 21 years Interpol list. Yeah. So no, this is the time. Most of some world, particularly United States, should be set up a coalition with its partner and the European Union, European country, and and the democratic nation like India and some other country. Then it will be more useful. Other way, and just one side country just raise this issue, United Nations also just speaking as a politician made a statement, and the other side is this country and not implementing sanction to the company is a business company, then company continue business with China, then it is not useful. 20 years ago, Chinese government little bit worried for the international pressure. Why? Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, China was not the secondary economic power. China needs the technology. China needs the other countries' help. Was not the biggest economy, but today China's second big economy, powerful countries. That's why ignored all the international warning. So now it is the time whole the world get lesson from this history, and all the world should be wake up. How can cooperate together, and how they should thinking twice. Today, China is the second big economic power in front of the whole world. How damaged democracy we witness for the Hong Kong's democracy. Hong Kong's autonomy is over. Taiwan's sovereignty is threatened by the CCP. Uyghur, Tibet, Southern Mongolia, and targeted by the ethnic genocide. Then it is a time all the world should be set up coalition. If nobody saying say stop to China, maybe up to 20 years later, China being the first economic power, then what kind of world we have